Chapter 81. Jinma 1. Jinma 1. In this world, settling who received the experience, the items, and the gold was exceedingly simple if two people weren't in the same party or guild. It was whoever had gotten in the last hit who had taken the enemy's life. I had missed out on the opportunity to gain the experience from the elf as a monster had torn her head off, but it wasn't too late for predation. I had already consumed the elf's body. All I had to do now was devour this beast who had eaten the head before it could be digested. You guys don't like them either, I muttered to myself as I hit the floor. I jumped up into the air and moved to the monster with Ubiquitous, floating in the empty air. As Ubiquitous had reached the advanced level, I could now stay in the air for a bit with it, increasing my mobility. If I took out the Wings of Jinma like this, maybe I could even fly if I really needed to as a last resort. My opponent's level was higher than even 230, overwhelmingly strong compared to the other monsters I had encountered so far. The monsters around it were rushing towards it to fuse. If I let it grow any stronger than this, it would be hard for me to fight it. I rushed forward, flames wreathing around my body. The wing-like demon's claws protruding my shoulders flapped behind me. He looks like us. How funny. Look at how angry he looks. Their whispers annoyed me. These monsters who had corrupted their souls, driven by their irrational hatred and anger to bring down all others down to their level, would dare compare themselves to me? Well, not that it matters. Their attacks do not affect me anyway. I split my demon's claws into several branches, stretching them out to the monster in front of me, cold and fire clashing. This giant monster's power was stronger than mine, but I immediately devoured the part of his soul that I had torn off during our clash. Given that and the number of monsters flocking to us, I had no need for food. I embedded some of my demon's claws into my greatsword to strengthen it as the monster's arm reached me. I jumped to its chest, stabbing my flaming greatsword into its torso. This doesn't feel right. Thorns made from my soul sprouted out from the edge of my greatsword, penetrating the monster's defenses and blooming inside it. Blood began pouring out of the monster, soaking me in gore. Wow! My sword and clothing absorbed most of it, but the blood on my bare skin was not. I could taste it running down my face, laughing as I enjoyed the taste of it. This may be my last day on the rookie's battlefield, but I'm having a blast. Kia! The monster seemed to have noticed that if this continued, it wouldn't last long. It snapped at me with its open mouth, just as it had bitten through the elf's neck before. I didn't try to avoid it, projecting demon's claws all over my body. They stuck out of my skin like thorns, making me look like some sort of weird hedgehog. With my great sword in hand, emitting an enchanting light, I intended to put all the power I had acquired here to good use. I charged straight at the ceiling of the mouth of this monster who had mistaken me for prey. Higher Demon's Claw became LV10 and evolved into Highest Demon's Claw. The strength of this skill has become abnormally high, and owners of a weak soul will panic when confronting you. The ability to shape the soul has increased. I stayed my sword when there were no more monsters around. The wind, which had been blowing strong up until now, had stopped entirely. The battlefield was completely peaceful, with no trace of battle remaining after I had consumed everything. Looking out at the fields around me, it almost felt as if the battle had all been an illusion. But it wasn't. Traces of it still lingered in my soul and my inventory. I examined the red muffler, the only thing that elf had possessed that I had acquired. The reason why I had wanted to keep it was simple. It was the one thing that elf had that I couldn't appraise. Pureblood's loyalty, 812/820. Defense 480. That was all I could tell about the muffler. Even though it appeared to be made of simple cloth, the increase it gave to defense was absurd, and the name felt suspicious. I had no intention of wearing it myself, but maybe Rain would like to see it. Well, let's go grab Sleeping Beauty. I removed the steel lid I had placed upon the pitfall and looked down. I had made the trap myself, but it was a lot deeper than I had thought. I could see Morena, somewhat faintly, down in the distance, looking up at me. "Seja," she shouted. She was still alive. Thankfully, this had been enough to keep her safe from the monsters and the madness noise. I can't get out, she cried out. I jumped down with a sigh, using ubiquitous halfway down to land next to her. It was a bit narrow down here, but Mirena immediately burst into tears and hugged me as soon as I landed. Seja, you're alive. I thought you were dead. Well, if I died, you would have been stuck down here, I suppose. No, I was worried about you. It was a bit annoying to hear that. It was always hard for me to deal with people who worried about me. I tried my best to soothe Mirena before I used ubiquitous to take us out. We still had a big problem to deal with, unfortunately, namely the Knights of Elicatra. Sooner or later, they would learn of that elf's death and send more personnel out to investigate. That would be dangerous for Mirena, even if she hadn't been directly involved in the battle. If they found out she had a connection with someone who had been interfering with their plans, it wouldn't end well for her. We should talk about what'll happen from now on. You mean about those scary people? They didn't recognize you as one of their kind. If you aren't careful of them, you'll die. I sighed, deciding I should tell her what I had been thinking about since I had arrived. I might not be returning here again. Not returning? Mirena's pupils dilated, her eyes shaking a bit. I was expected that she might be a bit shocked, but this was actually a bit surprising. She reached out and grabbed one of my hands, pulling her face close to mine. Are you saying we'll never meet again? Well, it's possible. But before that, we have to get out of here and avoid their detection. Why? I couldn't tell her about my evolution. When I clammed up, she became sulky and bowed her head down. Yes, I suppose that's how it is. If it's Seja, I suppose that it's possible. I have no intention of convincing you that I won't be able to return. No, I believe it. The words came out quickly. After all, you weren't a rookie in the first place, so you'll just stop being a rookie again, right? I almost drew my sword right then and there, but the time I had spent with her stopped me. I knew she held no hostility toward me. How? Well, it's easy if you just look at you. You feel different from the rest of us. There was too much I didn't know for me to guess what had given it away. Maybe it was because I had acted with my heart, hadn't been suspicious enough, that she had noticed. A bitter laugh came out of me. Today, I became sure of it since that person from the Knights of Elicatra was here for you. I thought that they had to know about someone as strong as Seja. I see. It occurred to me that Mirena had taken a beating today, too, while I had thought that I had it under control. No, maybe I had been thinking of Mirena as my ally this entire time and been relaxing because I felt like I could rely on her. So now you're going away. She gave herself a small nod, a blank expression upon her face. She gave my hand that she had still been holding a squeeze, looking at me and forcing encouragement into her voice. Then I'll leave here somehow too. Let's meet again outside. What? If you're not allowed to enter this place, then I have no choice but to leave to meet you, right? I was a bit taken aback, but decided to keep my reaction to myself. If I told her I thought that was absurd, there was no telling how she might react. So, you're not allowed to meet with other girls until I get out there. Any concern I had was quickly overwhelmed by her. 100 years. No. Can you wait about 200 years or so? No, I won't wait. It wasn't a joke on my part about the time it would take. Not so long for an elf, but more than a lifetime for a human. I felt like I should cut this off at the root and refuse her. Why? You're just saying that you won't be able to leave. Only. No, I mean it. This is a once-in-a-lifetime thing for us. After all, you said yourself I'm not a rookie. So, faced with Mirena, who was tilting her head as if she were genuinely curious about my line of thinking, I realized I still had some hidden prejudice against the elves. Could I really tell her that feelings for her had arisen in me? No, unless I meant it, nothing I said would provoke a positive reaction. Besides, it would be extremely difficult for her to break free from the rookie's battlefield. I pushed away my thoughts, knowing I had to choose my words carefully. I have to go now. Run away if things get too dangerous. You hear me? Hey, wait a second. Answer me before you go. I returned to the dungeon quickly, unable to waste any more time. I had to conquer this dungeon through and see the end of it with my own two eyes. Where is this? No, I had a job to do before that. Chapter 82. Jinma 2. Jinma 2. The situation I was in now was simple. Mirena had grabbed onto my sleeve while I had been opening the door back to the dungeon. I ignored it and stepped through. She didn't let go of me and was instead dragged through into the dungeon with me. Of course, this was entirely new to me. I had assumed there was no way Mirena could go through with me, especially since she couldn't even see the door when I opened it. Even if she had been able to go through it, I didn't intend to bring her into the dungeon with me. Had this really always been possible, or had something changed that I wasn't aware of? Well, I suppose asking why isn't helpful right now. It was clear that neither of us knew the cause of the current situation, and it was a waste of time to think about it. It would be more productive to consider what we would do from this point on. Wait, Seisha? What happened? Wait one moment. I activated my detection skill to the maximum, feeling a bit embarrassed as Mirena just continued to peer up at me. Usually, monsters didn't appear near the boss room, but I hadn't been here for quite some time between the tower, the garden, then finally the rookie's battlefield. I could sense 3 enemies nearby now. Stay right here. I'll be back after clearing out the monsters. Is this a battlefield too? More or less. It just had a different name, dungeon. How did I? You really are incredible, Seisha. I moved forward, intending to leave Mirena alone for a bit while I took care of the monsters. She tried to chase after me briefly, stopping as if she could sense that danger awaited me ahead. I started with the cavity to my right, using ubiquitous to close the distance to it. It felt like it had been a while since I was on this level of the dungeon. It took me a second to figure out where exactly I was. The monster that awaited me within was the bloody arachne, patiently waiting for an unassuming prey to wander in. Its lower body was the shape of a giant red spider, its legs trimming the webs it used to attack, and the upper body of a woman rising up from the stomach. Its eyes were gently closed, and it reminded me of a warrior caring for their weapons. Amongst the higher-level monsters, this one was an upper-class monster that could assimilate its body into its surroundings, concealing itself and entrapping all that ventured too close. Its sensing and assimilating skills were at least at an advanced level, and its attack skills were even strongest. Because the 7th floor had been full of strong monsters like this, it had been hard for me to use my abilities here, although that had changed. I have to be careful. The battle with the monsters in the rookie's battlefield required little skill, but if I wasn't on the top of my game here, my head would likely be separated from the rest of my body. I had to reach this enemy without being noticed and finish it off in a single blow. I hid in the shadows, crossing the gaps between them with ubiquitous, as I readied my sword with Demon's Claw. I exploded forward with my attack as soon as I had drawn close enough. Kayak! Arachne, who hadn't been able to detect me until my attack had already hit, opened their eyes at the moment my greatsword cleaved their head. A moment of surprise crossed through their eyes, inches away from my own, before my sword cleaved their upper body in half. You have gained 5,192,384 experience. You have received 57 gold and 19 silver. You have obtained the red blood spider web key. The what? I stopped devouring the spider's body and lifted up its head to confirm what I had thought. This arachne had blood-red eyes like the others I had killed so far. However, this one had white lines like a spider web going through its irises. The experience is almost double a normal one. I wondered if maybe this had been a rare species, not just a high-level one. It might have been truly dangerous if I hadn't been able to kill it in one blow. I cleaned up the body and double-checked my surroundings, but it appeared to be a coincidence that this rare species appeared. It dropped a special item too, the key. Although I had no explanation as to what it was, it felt like the key exuded a unique aura. Maybe one day I can figure out what it's for. I decided to stow it away in my inventory and keep moving. I still had 2 monsters left. It didn't take me long at all, maybe a few minutes at most, to finish up with the remaining 2 monsters and return to Mirena. She seemed worried about me, wiping tears from her eyes and grabbing my hand as soon as I came back. Her hand was still wet with tears, irritating me a bit. That could have been dangerous. You weren't just fighting out on the battlefield, but here as well. You can't become strong unless you're willing to take risks. Anyway, the area around here is safe now to take a second before we go. Where are we going? Don't complain, you're the one who followed me. I'm going to consult with someone who'll know what to do with you. She let out a choked sob, scared to be left alone again. I decided to ignore her and open another door, this time to the store. I didn't know how she had been able to travel with me to the dungeon, but she definitely couldn't enter the store. I had already tried it before with Leech on You. I removed her hand from me and stepped through into the store. You're here, Fate? Yeah. As always, Rain was wiping the same glass with a dry towel at the counter. I could see his eyes dart past me, the room becoming a bit chilly as he did, and looked behind me. Seisha, you're too cruel. You were going to leave me there. Morena, whom I had rejected and was obviously feeling scorned, squatted on the floor in the store. An elf, I heard Rain mutter quietly, a sense of fear filling the air as I tried to stop him. Get out quickly. By the time I said the words, Morena's complexion had turned pale, and she collapsed onto the floor. She didn't die, however. Rain had merely stolen her energy. No, it has elven blood but is a hybrid. I cannot overlook that fact. Hybrid? The face of the Knight of Elicatra I met flashed through my mind. She had said we weren't elves, Morena included, and now Rain wasn't killing her where she stood even though he loathed elves more than anything. Perhaps there was a difference between what I saw as an elf and what Rain did. This is odd. He finally seemed to realize that I was still there, the glass dropping out of his hand and hitting the ground. His complexion paled as he bowed to me. I apologize, Fate. I did something foolish. I should be more cautious. I apologize for the inconvenience. I momentarily lost my temper. Well, it's all right. Morena just passed out. I cannot atone enough for my actions. I had no option but to laugh it off as I watched the flustered Rain. In truth, I was sort of happy to see this new side of him. Though if Morena knew that, she'd be pretty upset with me. I can't allow this to remain. Allow me to fix this. Rain snapped his fingers, a thin mat appearing below Morena's body to support her. I could see the gentle rise and fall of her chest as she breathed, confirming that she was just asleep. I kept quiet as I watched Rain retrieve the broken pieces of the glass he dropped, waiting until he was done to speak. I have something to ask you about. Is it how you and this hybrid were able to enter the store together? Well, there's that, but I also had a more important issue. I mentioned to him how I had been able to bring her back from the battlefield. His eyes widened in surprise as he listened. You must have gained some new ability while on the rookie's battlefield. Ah, thinking about it, I wondered if it was the red scarf. I pulled it out and handed it over to him to examine. He held it in one hand, closing his eyes. Soft, purple mana welled up out of his fingertips as he examined the item with his own magic. It felt similar to the mana of Jinma, and it fascinated me that it had its own distinct characteristics. Rain nodded a couple of times before opening his eyes once more. The appraisal will be 15,000 gold, sir. Please take it. In an instant, the money was pulled out from my inventory. Rain's magical energy enveloped the muffler and caused it to float in the air, safe and sound. I had been worried that I might need to destroy it, but Rain didn't seem concerned about it. The 15,000 gold that I have received will cover the cost of appraising and repairing this muffler, the pure blood's loyalty. It makes me a bit uneasy to work with something elven crafted, but I will do my best. So what does it do? Simply put, it allows you to use abilities outside of your current range. The words were indeed straightforward, but not the meaning behind them. To clarify, it's an artifact that allows you to push beyond your current ability. Say you had an advanced detection ability of level 9, it would allow you to use the highest level of the detection ability at level 1. Or say an intermediate magic at level 9 used at an advanced level of 1. It will push you just a bit beyond your limits. What a ridiculous artifact. That's what that elf had been wearing, and they weren't even a particularly high-ranking knight either. Are these knights of Elicatra that strong, that they can hand these out to their members? The price for using such an artifact is a life, after all. I looked back at Morena, who was still slumbering peacefully. Rain merely shook his head with a bitter smile as I considered how I could pay that price. Not quite that. Someone with low vitality would be consumed by this artifact, or simply fail to use it. However, you could use it even when it wasn't equipped because the consumption of life cannot affect you. Still, I can't forgive the elves who would design such artifacts as these. It can't affect me? Your vitality is infinitely evolving through the consumption of others' lives, replacing your own with theirs. In that regard, you cannot be surpassed, no matter how long another's life is. If Rain's words were true, they were starting to paint a picture of what sort of people these knights were. Even that woman who had thought herself to be superior. Wait, it's an artifact that lets me use abilities beyond my limits, right? Yes. What kind of ability do I have that allows me to break through the rookie's battlefield and take Morena out of it? Ha ha ha. He just laughed, not answering my question. I hadn't called up my status in a while, not wanting to check it before I evolved, but now I couldn't help. Kong Siha, Fate. Crimson Elf Chaos Claw LV 199. Strength, 1,834. Stamina, 1,913. Magic, 1,985 luck. Skills, Ebonheart, Predation LV 8. Supreme Martial Arts LV 5. Advanced Lunatic Trickster LV 8. Supreme Regeneration LV 5. Intermediate Devil's Fang LV 8. Supreme Demon's Claw LV 1. Supreme Detection LV 4. Supreme Surprise LV 5. Supreme Fairy Tale LV 3. Supreme Shadow Step LV 9. Intermediate Ubiquitous LV 9. Supreme Leadership LV 9. Best Grade Abnormal Resistance LV 3. Intermediate Iron Skin LV 3. Greater Black Light LV 8. Greater Fire Magic LV 2. Greater Healing Magic LV 4. Greater Ice Magic LV 5. Greater Madness Noise LV 1. There could only be one option. Out of all of the level 9 skills I currently possessed, there was only one of them that could affect others instead of myself. Leadership. This is the path you will take in the future, Fate. I'm extremely excited to see how you will change, and the fate of this hybrid as well. Rain said with a bloody smile. I couldn't laugh it off this time. I had to keep moving forward. This will be the last trial. Are you prepared? How much will it cost me? Do you need help? No, I don't think so. He should know by now that I wasn't the type to ask for help. I wondered when I would learn more about him. Please take care of her until I come back. The boss room will be too dangerous for her. Again. You really are amazing. Rain shook his head and heaved a sigh. I ended up leaving the store with an item that increased my stats. Morena was still asleep as I left, snoring away, completely unaware. Chapter 83, Jinma 3. Jinma 3. Took too long for me to arrive here finally. How many times had I returned to this room? Right here where the door to the boss was before. This was all that was left now, and nothing was stopping me from entering anymore. All right. Even though no one was around to hear me, I talked to myself. Even after acquiring the Wings of Jinma, I still felt nervous about going through this door. What is waiting for me inside? No time like the present. I slapped my cheeks, forcing the thoughts that were forming in my mind like stormy clouds. I had no need for questions or hesitation. I just had to keep moving forward as I had been doing until now. I double-checked my equipment. I had Blood Baptism, the sword I made using Blood Shadow, the Twilight Sword, my charms of Dark Drops and Illusions, and Herma's Bloodstone Ring. I wasn't wearing the ring currently. However, finding no need for it as it didn't increase my abilities. I had plenty of emergency food left still, and my physical condition felt good. I pushed open the door to the boss room, greeted by the sight of a large cavity in which gloomy purple fog swirled. It was dark in here, much more so than in the other rooms. Key. Who is this now? A voice rang throughout the room. I expected to be greeted by an attack, but it seemed this one wanted to talk. Yes, I've been waiting to meet you. Who are you? Reaching out with my sensing, I was able to locate my opponent and tell what he looked like. It was much larger than any other monster I had faced so far, even the one in the rookie's battlefield, and was at least 30 times my own size. However, its massive body was chained at the far end of this cavern from me bound to the large wall. I couldn't tell what sort of material the chain was made of, but it dug into the wall and bound all of its body. The only thing it could move was its fingers, toes, and mouth. Why is he tied up? He still feels so overwhelmingly strong despite that. Don't know me? Don't you know me? Ha 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 ha. KH. It was an attack. Madness noise? No, not quite. It was a higher level skill than that. A terribly advanced technique that breaks the opponent's will with a word, destroying their soul and stealing their body. If I hadn't been training my resistance with L, if I hadn't been learning how to interfere with the opponent's force of strength and reduce its effect on me, that would have been the end of it already. Was that the first time you heard that one? It's really a funny joke. I could feel the fog rising ominously, trying to reach out to me. Thanks to my predation of the elves and monsters on the rookie's battlefield, however, I learned a few things about ice magic. I froze the fog before it could touch me, but it continued to rise. I knew it. You are a fun one. What a noble sacrifice you have made. Coming here, walking the path that you do. Don't kid around. I decided to change my tactics, dropping the ice magic that I wasn't familiar with yet and combining my flame magic with Demon's Claw. I shaped the Demon's Claw into a shield, evaporating the mist that came close to me as I jumped off into the air with Ubiquitous. That's not fun. The fog united with a terrible purpose at the point where I jumped to. I managed to pull out of the way at the last second, but my mana took a hefty blow in protecting myself. As expected, the fog was his weapon, full of murderous intent and mana as it flowed throughout this space. It was fundamentally the same as the Wings of Jinma. Same as me. What sort of form is that? A weak elf. I ground my teeth and leapt away from the fog. Ubiquitous was a bad matchup for this guy. This entire space was filled with his mana, so no matter where I tried to jump to, the fog would be there waiting for me. It would be better if I just moved fast physically. Weak. Slow. How silly. Why did I have to wait here for someone like this? A sound wave spread out through the cavern to hit me. The fog kept grasping onto me wherever I was. No matter how much I evaporated, it just continued to increase and tighten around me. The amount of mana here was absurd. If I hadn't gone through Jinma's tower, I wouldn't have stood a chance. My senses were working overtime as I tried to attend to the flow of mana coming from the monster's body, and throughout this space, moving all the while. What a shame that I have to wear this chain. It would be so much more fun without it. Shit! I slashed at the fog with my sword and my demon's claws. I tried to burn through it with flames or freeze it with ice. Even Black Mine was of no use. I tried Lunatic Trickster, but it wasn't possible to even activate here. It was a skill that set up traps and placed an area under your control, but his mana was already dominating this space. None of my skills were working on this fog, so I had to go after the body. I hit the floor running, burning away the fog around me as I tried to swing my sword at his neck, but it was pointless. Weak. Too weak. The closer I got to him, the thicker the fog became. By the time I neared his body, the fog in front of me rose like a thick wall, threatening to crush me. I couldn't burn through it fast enough. It was endless. I had already burned through a big chunk of my emergency food. If this is all you can manage, then you might as well just become a sacrifice for me. The fog gathered in the air and formed huge spheres, a faint light emitting from the center of each of them. Pelcadia's jewel. It was colorless and transparent, but I knew in an instant. It was the same as the jewels of Pelcadia I had collected so far. It held an immense amount of power, however. I wondered if that was because of its user. Even if I put all of mine together, I didn't think it would amount to that level of strength. It was too overwhelming. I had to find a way to get rid of that gem, but I couldn't break it with my own power. It would be easier to just chop him up, but I couldn't do that without destroying that gem. Are you done yet? The spheres flew in at such speed that I had to wonder if they were using Ubiquitous. I had been able to read some of their trajectory and avoid the brunt of it, but some of my demon's claws covering my body were torn off. HRK. I could feel fear squeezing my heart. Were those spheres really only made of mana? I had no clue how I would even get close to that level of power using the demon's claw. I had no time to rest, though, as the spheres kept up the attack and refused to allow me room to breathe. Ha ha ha! It's so cute watching you play. Level 199 Crimson Elf Chaos Claw. All the strength and experience I had acquired up until now, which felt so grandiose to me, evaporated. No matter how strong I was, it all seemed so useless in front of this enemy that was so much stronger than me. It wasn't that I couldn't decipher their identity or figure out the trick. They were just overwhelmingly strong. Palcadia's jewel materialized in the fog, continuing to consolidate its strength, filled with mana stronger than any weapon. With the fog and that jewel adding to this monster's power, and its ability to detect wherever I was, there was no place I was safe in here. Are you feeling helpless? But I'm the one stuck here. What the hell are you doing? If I used Ubiquitous, it would all be over. The spheres would fly in without delay and destroy me the moment I reappear. Maybe if it were a higher level than advanced, it would be able to trick him. I couldn't ignore the power contained in his words, however. The spheres were pressing me too hard to break down the power contained in his voice with my predation. His words slowly poisoned my mind as I was unable to stop them fully. In the next moment, I focused on deflecting the mental attack. It was enough for one of the spheres to find an opening, cutting away at my flesh. He's too strong. Even though his body was stuck there, this balance of offense and defense was superb. It felt as far away from me as the heavens above. No matter how I struggled, I still felt like I was dancing to his tune. How could I evade these orbs attacking me? How could I get rid of the mana that was protecting him? I had no clue about the former, but the latter came easily enough. I had to bring out my own mana, the Wings of Jinma. It may be impossible to compete with him on an equal footing, but maybe I could break through for at least one moment. The conclusion I had come to was that its body was weak, unlike its mana. It was decrepit and wounded. It made me wonder if this boss was in pain, but I pushed the question out of my mind. It wouldn't help me now. The only thing that mattered was to reach him. If I could do that, if I could destroy its heart, then I could kill him. Now, how could I actually get there? Who? I exhaled, thinking about the answer to that. I had to surprise him. In this realm filled with his mana, I had to hide somehow. If I pretended to be assimilated into his mana and slipped through unnoticed, I could put my sword in his heart. Out of the skills I had one that maybe would work. I hadn't used it yet, convinced that it wouldn't work again if I used it once. But I had to trust my intuition. He was a different opponent than the ones I had faced before, both of us different in our absolute power of being. To deal with it, I had to raise my level a bit. But if I didn't win this battle now, I wouldn't be able to grow stronger. I'd be dead. What a bad joke. Already tired out? Nothing left to eat. There's one thing left for me to eat. I responded, calming my mind. From now on, I had to receive the brunt of his attacks head-on and conserve my mana for my surprise attack. It would hurt a lot, but I couldn't let it overwhelm me before I let off my surprise attack. It didn't matter how badly he broke my body, so long as I could get that attack off, I would win. For the first time in a truly long while, I felt afraid. Fear that I hadn't felt when I had been fighting those countless monsters or even with the Knight of Elicatra. Right now, I felt desperation born from facing death head-on. 1. He asked the question as a sphere came toward me. I refused to blink as I watched the sphere approach, taking in a deep breath as I prepared myself. I lifted up my demon's claw, pulling my soul back into myself and concentrating all my mana into one point. In the next moment, the sphere reached me. My blood baptism was torn apart, my right arm disappearing without a trace. The pain of it was enough to whiten my mind and made me want to scream. My regeneration started immediately, but it didn't make the pain any less terrible. I didn't let out a single noise, however. Kahahaha. Are you really determined to die? To give up your life as a sacrifice to me? The voice penetrated my soul, rotting me from within. I was consumed by the thought that I had to do anything he wanted me to. I moved my mana quickly away from that part of my consciousness, however. As if I had no thoughts, as if I had no will, I took a step forward. Ha! Ignore it. This you? The fog rising from all over grabbed at my body, assimilating me without resistance. My flesh was ripped off, my blood flowing freely into his mana. I can't catch it. I walked through the darkness filling this space, using a shadow step that had not yet progressed to the highest level. However, with my surprise and fairy tales, it was enough to hide any trace of me. Found it! A sphere flew forward, an explosion ringing out in the cavern as it collided at a point in the air. It was a display of mana enough to terrify anyone witnessing it, an explosion strong enough to destroy this dungeon. It was concentrated on one point in space that had been distorted, erasing everything that had been there. Specifically, my alter ego who had taken the hit for me. Am I free now? He was talking to himself. Ignore it and move forward. It's been a long time. A really long time. Keep pushing through. The Wings of Jinma, which had assimilated all of the tower's mana and were now firmly enveloping my damaged body like armor, cut a path through the mana of this monster. I desperately raised the strength of my surprise and fairy tales. Freedom. Now, I am free. His body was right in front of me. I could sense his heartbeat weakly pulsing throughout his chest. It made me laugh how weak I could tell this body of his was. I put my sword through that weak heart, pouring out all the mana I had left. Kahak! Achievement! You have walked freely in the shadow of Jinma. Advanced Shadow Step became LV10 and has become the highest Shadow Step. Congratulations! You have satisfied the conditions to synthesize special high-level skills. KH. I had succeeded in killing him. You have gained 89,918,984 experience. You have received 23,918 gold. You have obtained Palcadia's jewel. Nothing. Quest completed. You have gained 293,183,292 experience. Only. You have received 50,000 gold. You have obtained the key to the castle. Level up. I swallowed the blood pouring out from him. His flesh a delicacy for me to dine upon. The chain that had been restraining him came loose, flashing briefly before disappearing into my inventory. You have obtained 1/2 of the sealing chain. I moved out of the way of the falling body, no longer supported by the chain. I moved atop it and laughed triumphantly. Evolution is now available. And so, the final evolution of this dungeon had arrived. Chapter 84. Jinma 4. Jinma 4. A breakthrough joins this evolution. Limit breakthrough means surpassing the limits of the lower system of living things and entering the upper system. The existence of the lower system cannot properly interpret the existence of the upper system. Even if an ability is used with the same power, it will be pushed out of the battle and be unable to generate power. If the limit is broken, all elements that compose the soul will be replaced with a higher quality of energy. This includes physical abilities and skills, as well as magic. Would you like to evolve? Instead of the usual choice of evolution, I was greeted by this notification window. I thought evolution was breaking through the limit, but apparently not. This talk about becoming a higher being was odd. The regular evolution had been shocking enough. What would this be like? Still, when I thought about it, parts of this made sense. The mana of Jinma, for example, was mana that I couldn't fully deal with. I was able to use part of it, but its full power was much greater than I could physically exert. It made sense it would be designed to be used by these so-called higher beings. That monster I just killed. All of those who dealt with it or mana like it must technically be these superior creatures. Perhaps the Knights of Elakatra are like that too? That knight's power was definitely great, and their mana felt similar to that of Jinma's. It was certainly possible. More thoughts filled my mind about these subsystems and higher levels, but I soon concluded it was pointless. If I wanted to understand, then I should just become an entity that was a part of this higher level system. Maybe then I would learn more about it and get stronger to boot. That was my goal all along anyway. Before that, however, I still had some work to do. Because my shadow walk had reached the highest level, it became possible for me to synthesize special high-level skills. According to that notification, my skills would change in this evolution, so it would be wise for me to do that first. Special Advanced Skill Reaper can be synthesized. Top-notch Surprise, Fairy Tale, Demon's Claw, top-notch Combat Skill, martial arts, top level or higher special movement skill, shadow step. Possess the highest level magic skill, flame magic. Possess top-notch combat assistance skills, detection, command. Would you like to synthesize the Reaper skill? The surprise, fairy tale, demon's claw, martial arts, and shadow walk skills will disappear. I closed my eyes and thought about what I would lose. Of course, it wouldn't be easy to synthesize a new skill. Nothing had been ever since I opened my eyes as a goblin. I opened my eyes and looked through the skills again, finally nodding. Surprise, fairy tale, demon's claw, martial arts, and shadow walk skills have been synthesized. You have acquired the Reaper skill. Reaper LV1. Death is in everything that exists. All actions related to killing are heavily increased. With a higher skill level, you can deal death in more diverse and powerful ways. I looked at the other skills I had access to, several I had known about before. Many of them were still at the beginner level and couldn't do much yet. This Reaper skill, however, felt like the sort of skill I would have associated with that of a higher being. Its limits were unclear, and its potential was absurd. I had to make sure my abilities supported it so that I could use it properly. It had the potential to be a ridiculously powerful skill. No sense waiting around anymore. I wanted to finish devouring this giant monster and check out the final reward of this dungeon, as well as figure what this key was for. But first, I had to evolve. It shouldn't be all that different from what I had been doing up until now. But I was still nervous. I tried to shake off those emotions and confirmed that I wanted to evolve in the notification window. Several items popped out of my inventory, circling around me. They were Pelcadia's jewels I had acquired throughout the dungeon, gradually growing closer to me as they orbited around my body. No way! The gems fused into my body as soon as I had said it. It didn't hurt much, but fear consumed me as I felt like everything that composed my body was shattering apart. I lost consciousness. When I woke up again, I was surrounded by darkness. I couldn't feel or see anything around me. What is this? Did something go wrong when I chose to evolve? I felt like I was floating in space. This didn't seem like the dungeon, and even though my sensing ability should have reached the highest level just now, I couldn't sense anything around me. Was I even in a physical state right now? I couldn't tell. All I knew was that I existed. You betrayed us. A voice echoed through the dark space, the voice of a young man. You like that word? Don't you? A new voice, somewhat familiar, but I couldn't quite place it. The promise has been broken. I will not allow you to become the monarch. Do whatever you want. I've already abandoned it all. Your ability to run away is amazing, but remember this. I am the only monarch. From the moment you went down there, you won't be able to do as you please. How about putting in some effort for once? You! The voices of the two men disappeared without a trace as I tried to concentrate on them. Absolutely not. Immediately cutting through the silence, the sharp voice of a woman appeared. I could tell who it was right away. Elle. You don't have to sacrifice anything. It's not a sacrifice. I'm just taking a small step back so I can keep moving forward. How many steps back? I don't know. About 50? You idiot. Stay here. I'll come back someday. Someday? The voice opposite of Elle's was a man, still familiar sounding. Their voices calmed down after a while, fading away once more. I shook my head, unsure of what their conversation had been about. It's an impossible choice for me to make. This time it sounded like Rain. His voice was so familiar to me by now. You just can't be bothered to choose. You know I respect you. That's the first time I've heard that. I know you'll be back. Don't look sad. You trust me too much. Don't you know praising a child too much is bad? Is that so? I had thought that the more praise you gave them, the more they grew. Silence for but a moment. I'll be here waiting for you, Fate. Both voices vanished again, and light began to shine through the space I was in. I thought over the voice who was responding to Rain, engraved into my mind for a moment before it slipped away. That had been my voice, talking to Rain. This place was inside of me, my brain or soul or whatever. It was a place that contained all that I was. My being promoted to a higher level, by breaking through that limit, my knowledge and memories that I hadn't even realized I forgot were returning, bit by bit. But this was the end of that. I had barely taken the first step toward Jinma, and I was still so far away. I could tell this place was rejecting me, slowly pushing me away. Sorry, little one. It'll be a miracle if they wake up. They seem to be about 6 years old. Who will take care of them? My consciousness began to fade once more as I heard the voices of some unknown adults. I considered these words briefly, chewing over them before my mind went black. Belkina. Belkina are among the rarest of the races underground, outstanding fighters that have always stood at the center of the demon lineage. Belkina, who were born under God's favoritism and fell due to the curse of all the other races who loathed them. They walk a path close to death, having awakened to deal with the power of Jinma, which they use as a weapon to kill their opponents. Belkina are a race of evolution, known for their fast rate of evolution and strength. Many Belkina die out, however, before they can show off their talent. If you do not have the will to follow this path, you too will share that fate. Kill and devour, and the path before you will open. The seal of the castle has been released by completing all conditions. You may use the key to return to the castle. My eyes slowly open, feeling odd in my new form. I hadn't experienced the agony of evolution that usually came, but I didn't mind that. Only, everything felt different. The appearance of the world itself feeling new before me. I could feel everything around me, the details so vivid. Jinma's mana welled inside me, filling out every inch of my body to protect and strengthen me. I could tell that my mana was affecting the mana of the world around me, changing its shape in direction to my command and spreading out. I felt like I could handle Jinma's mana perfectly now. I created a mirror of ice before me, looking at my reflection. My face was much the same as it had been as a crimson elf, although my ears were shorter. My skin was as dark as pitch now, instead of that blood-red hue, and my body didn't look as fragile as it had as an elf. I was more muscular now and perhaps a bit taller, although not quite as large as I had been as a bugbear. I wasn't dissatisfied, though, feeling the power welling up inside of me. I decided to call out my status, barely able to register what appeared before me. Fate, Belkina LV1. New Magic 52. Soul Magic 87. Luck Dash. Skill Gluttony LV1. Reaper LV1. Lunatic Trickster LV1. Ubiquitous LV1. Domination LV1. Blackmine LV1. Belkina Spell LV1. Ha ha ha! I laughed weakly, too shocked to speak. Chapter 85. Songju 1. Songju 1. Belkina were demons that dealt with the power of Jinma. They didn't appear all that different from Crimson Elves on a surface level, but the gap between this subsystem and the upper system was even larger than I initially thought. There were only 2 attributes that made up the new status. This new magic and soul magic. That meant that all the powers of my body and soul from before were replaced with magical power. The Crimson Elves had still been in the same realm as the bugbears and goblins, but with this I was entirely out of that realm. Perhaps my entire body has been reconstructed solely with magical energy? Woo! I let out a breath as I tried to wrap my head around all of that. The quantity had significantly decreased, but I could tell the power had increased just as much. I was able to move even faster and produce an even higher quality of mana. The way it persisted after had increased too. Moving my body now felt like how I would move mana, and the activation time needed for me to use my mana had significantly reduced. The mana flowing through me was amplified and generated by my heart. The pitch-black organ felt right at home in my new form, now able to operate at full power that it was no longer constrained by a fragile body. I supposed it was natural that a Jinma's body had a dark heart as I was unable to find the skill for it. Even though I was back at level 1, I figured that creatures from the subsystem would have a hard time touching me. Not that it made sense for me to go after them either, however. Predating them wouldn't grant me the strength it would have before, now that the gap had widened too much. I would now have to build myself up as a new character in this higher system. My level, my skills. Not that I should take my new level as just a simple one, however. Still, I felt like I had lost some part of myself in gaining this tremendous new power. Like I had become less human. This feeling, well, I supposed I had a lot of things I needed to consider aside from that. My new skills and status, these gems, my past. But before I figured all of that out, I needed a meal. I looked down at this giant's body. This dinner that would provide me with the benefit of a superior being. This body was so ridiculously massive I had barely made a dent in it earlier while eating. But now I could enjoy the fruits of my labors, this predation in the best condition possible. Now then, black smoke rose from my body. It looks like my ability of predation hadn't fundamentally changed, so I had no difficulty controlling it. Thank you for the meal. The flesh of this giant reminded me of instant food. It was simultaneously sweet, salty, and spicy. It felt like one of those foods packed with calories, enough to make you gain a pound with just one bite. At the same time, as the smoke tore into the flesh, I was using my mouth to bite into it as well. I was overwhelmed by a need to devour that wasn't as simple as hunger, fully engulfed in eating this body. Maybe it was because I was eating for the first time in this new form. New magic has increased by 7. Soul magic has increased by 5. These 2 notification windows appeared before my eyes as I finished consuming the body that had been big enough to fill this cavern, weak light emitting from me. There had been no skill acquisition, and the stat increases were seemingly small. However, given how small the stats were to start, I knew that this was a significant increase despite the low numbers. Still, it feels like I'm starting over from scratch, I said to myself with a bitter smile. The thoughts that I had been putting off came back to my mind. Pelcadia's jewels were absorbed into me, and without them, I wouldn't have become a Belkina, an elite amongst demons, a form I acquired through the jewels. Had they been preparing me for this evolution from the start, or would this be the outcome for anyone who had broken through the Black Palace? Maybe they just give the qualification to evolve. They were only a part of the many trials I had taken to reach this point, after all. The gems probably just served as a medium to amplify the power of those who gathered them. I doubted that this dungeon was the only place in this vast world that had these artifacts, either. Just as I had started here as a goblin and became a Belkina, I had to consider the possibility that the conquerors of other dungeons would be reborn as I had. There were also those who were originally high-ranking entities to consider as well, who had been building their ranks as a superior entity long before I became one. With that in my mind, it really felt like I had just begun to take the first step. Those memories? I couldn't deny that I was the person who was talking with Rain and Elle, although I hadn't been able to recover all of those memories. Was everything I knew wrong? Was I originally from Hater, not Earth? The voice had said the boy had been found when he was 5 or 6, and yet the great fusion took place when I was 20 years old. Had I moved from Hater to Earth when I was a child? It wasn't as shocking to me as I thought it might have been. I already had plenty of questions about where I had come from during my time as a monster. Even if I weren't a human to start with, all I could think of it was, oh, is that so? It might not have been possible for me to get over it if I had learned of it when I was a goblin, but now I could just gloss over it. Things that weren't human or even creatures of Earth. Having a family that wasn't connected to me by blood. None of it could compare to what I had gone through so far. But I still had questions. What about the farmer Fate, who I had thought of as my partner? And why did I lose my life on the day of the Great Fusion? Why had I gone to Earth in the first place? There had to be a reason, but I had no clue what it was. And, more important than those problems, Elle. How did we first meet? Did she recognize me from the start? Was that why she acted the way she did? I was worried about bringing it up since my memories hadn't fully returned yet. I'll have to wait a bit longer. I felt terrible saying it, trembling as I thought of Elle. I forced the thought of her out of my mind, bringing my attention back to the cavern around me and the golden box that appeared within. Goddess Touch, 800/800. I found an artifact with no information inside it. It was apparently neither a goddess nor a hand. It was a mineral-like object that looked like a crystal, with a sharp tip on both its top and bottom. I could feel its desire to suck in my blood as it floated out of my hand and started spinning around me. Ha! It appeared that the crystal recognized me as its user, although I still had no information on it aside from its name and durability. How can I even activate it? I decided not to worry about it for now. My sense had reached the highest level and increased even further past that with my evolution, allowing me to see through the essence of things, yet I couldn't tell what it did. No doubt, I would be spending most of the gold I acquired to figure out its purpose. A dark shadow formed in the middle of the wall where the boss was, mana forming in a vortex. It looked like a passage, probably leading outside. I hadn't left this dungeon due to the standards I had set for myself, but now it was different. I accomplished what I had set out to do here. Staying here any longer would accomplish nothing. Now I could go out. Finally, leave this desolate, monster-filled basement out to the world above, full of foolish humans and the society I missed so much. To find a family that I had left behind for my own safety, and to atone for that. To find a nice fluffy bed that I could sleep in all day. Jajangmyeon. To eat all the jajangmyeon I could. I laughed at the thought of eating real food, unable to stop myself from laughing at my own messed up priorities. That was fine, though. My mind hadn't let go of the tension from the very beginning, but now I was feeling a bit of comfort. I was about to take a great step forward, and I was happy with myself for reaching this far. I could easily admit that now. I thought about what I should do first after I went to get Lee Chanyu and Morena. Only, Lee Chanyu, it's over. I sent a message to Lee Chanyu, but only jumbled noise returned. I wasn't sure what sort of situation he was in, but I felt confident that he would conquer the 6th floor safely. I decided to hold off on talking with him for now and instead resolved to grab Morena first. I opened the door to the store. The door didn't appear. I immediately fell into a panic when the door wouldn't open, worried thoughts consuming me as to why this was happening, what I could do now. No, stay calm. Did I have any other options? It was too late to give up now. I tried to summon the door to the garden, but it also didn't appear. The tower then. I tried to go to Jinma's tower next, and a massive black iron gate materialized in front of me. Never thought I'd be happy to see this place. I quickly found out, however, that the door was locked. I pulled the key I had acquired from my inventory and tried it. Finding the key turned easily. The door opened unbidden as soon as it was unlocked. It was so natural for me to do it that I hardly noticed that I had just opened the door of Jinma's tower as if I were accustomed to it. As if I had done it 1,000 times before. I looked at the key I had pulled out without thinking, the key to the castle. Peering beyond the gates, I could see a world thick with mana beyond them. In it, a gigantic castle with a moat and beautiful decorations awaited me. It was the toy castle that Elle and I had made, now the size of a real castle. Chapter 86. Songju 2. Songju 2. I stood in front of that overwhelmingly magnificent sight for a while. No doubt it had been the castle I had built while withstanding Elle's attacks and temptations. Every wall and battlement was precisely where I placed it. That toy castle I built had been roughly the size of my upper body, however, but this one was large enough to hold 1,000 people easily. I was convinced that it was mine for some curious reason. That it was connected to me. That it was my home. This was where I had to go back to. They were all waiting in there for me, both L and A, returning to their original assignments. I wouldn't get anywhere by just standing here ogling it. I stepped forward slowly, picking up speed as I moved until I was leaping through the air with ubiquitous, stopping just before the moat. My body was now made of pure mana, and it reduced the boundary between my skills to nothing. I considered this as I looked into the moat. It was filled with a dark, reflective black liquid. I had no clue what it was, nor did I want to know. As I stood there looking at it, the drawbridge lowered from the castle. I was filled with an odd sensation of nostalgia as I crossed over. "You're here, Fate." Rain's voice greeted me, sounding as if nothing had changed. He followed his greeting up with a hearty laugh. "How did this happen?" "What do you mean, didn't you build this yourself? Didn't she tell you? Do you think she told me?" I raised my head to look at the top floor of the western spire, made out of golden bricks, unlike the rest of the castle that was made out of dark, black stones. I felt like something was up there, some spirit that was awaiting me. "If you need some time to prepare yourself, How about visiting later? How is Mirena? I decided to ignore what was waiting for me up there, knowing it to be a troublesome woman. The hybrid is still asleep. It's all right to just let her rest for now if you don't want to wake her. How about A? He is scouting ahead. I wondered why they had left where they had been to come here. No doubt it had something to do with the fact that I couldn't open the door to those places anymore. Not yet, fate. Rain decided to speak up, noticing I had been thinking pretty seriously about what was happening. Not yet. Yes, not yet. How about for now you take the first steps toward freedom? I felt vaguely aware of what he was trying to say. They were currently in a situation where they couldn't act as they wanted, and I had to be the one to solve it. But how? Perhaps the answer would come to me so long as I moved forward. I followed after Rain, examining this castle I had made out of toy blocks. I was already very familiar with its structure, both internal and external. Or I should have been. But, as I walked, I came out to a place I didn't know. We entered the interior of the castle and began to descend to the third level of the basement. But now the passage had been cut off, and a staircase that continued lower had appeared. I don't remember building a fourth level to the basement. This is a secret place that was originally hidden here. He lowered his head without any further ado, stepping back for me to continue. I nodded and kept walking forward. I'll be back. I will be waiting. My surroundings gradually darkened as I went down the stairs. It didn't feel like normal darkness, but rather that the light had disappeared by the will of something in this space. As I continued further down, I felt as if my own breathing became clearer, loud in my eardrums. But I wasn't the only thing breathing down here, a harsh sound of raspy breath coming from further in. I knew that Rain wouldn't have guided me to a dangerous place, so I stepped forward into the dark without hesitation. I didn't know how long I continued down the stairs, but eventually, my feet touched solid ground. My head raised up to examine what was around me. I was in a wide cavern with a wall ahead of me, no doubt as tall as that staircase had been. The ground around me was vibrating in time with a giant creature's breathing, the very same one before me. The body of a giant monster, a massive blackbird, was pressed against the wall by a chain that was embedded into the rock. Have you arrived, my master? Hadn't this been more or less the exact scene of the boss on the last floor of the Black Palace? A brief concern that I might have to repeat that battle crossed my mind, but I dismissed it. This monster wasn't trying to antagonize me, and once I considered it, it was easy to tell why. I could feel some sort of unseen connection between us, binding us together. I was his master and he was my subordinate. It wasn't something that anyone else could tell me. I could feel it in my mana. I'm happy. My mission has been accomplished, and I can face you once more. His voice was hoarse, his body covered in wounds. Several parts of his body even appeared to be missing entirely. If they were just physical wounds, the power of Jinma could heal them. But the wounds he was suffering from were caused by high-level magic that I couldn't even dream of. His new magic and soul magic had both been harmed, reaching an irreversible level of damage. I could tell he was having a difficult time just breathing. Ha, ha, ha. Without thinking, I could feel something forcing its way out of my throat. The more I tried to force it out, the more some repulsive force blocked me from doing so. I knew there was a name somewhere in my mind for this creature, but it was impossible to reach it. It frustrated me, anger and resentment filling me as I reached for memories that weren't there. You remember my name, but I can't speak it. I will die soon. That you remember my name, that is enough for me. Deep wounds marked his body, injuries caused by his enemies. By my enemies? Yet he had survived until now for this final purpose. Master, would you accept the last request of this foolish subordinate? Tell me. I had never been able to use my power of leadership until now. This castle, built out a game, had turned into such a huge fortress. I would ask you for destruction and death to all of our enemies, for victory at the end of a path of blood and death. All right, since my days as a goblin, this creature had been connected to me as my subordinate. It made no sense to me that my poor leadership skills had grown so strong despite my lack of use for them, but now it was clear. My skills had grown rapidly because such a powerful creature was connected to me as my subordinate. I will be reborn at the end of that path. After your victory, I will stand by you once more. I believe it. The enormous magical power that this creature had was poured out to create the stronghold that Elle and I had built through our game. All of us, together, had created this incredible fortress. May your future be blessed as you move forward on this path. Thank you. I looked up at this giant bird-like monster once more. If I hadn't been able to evolve into a Jinma, would he have been left like this? I was glad that hadn't happened, that now he could rest. I couldn't remember anything about my past or him, but I knew that he was my subordinate, that he had endured decades, if not more, here in this place for me. So now, please let me rest, Master. I took a deep breath, looking at the chains hanging around him. It was the same as the seal chain I had found in the boss's room on the 7th floor. It looks like I had already found the other half, right here. I pulled it from my inventory and placed it upon the floor. It had shrunk to a size where I could hold it, but the power in it remained the same. I began to fuse it with mana, moving instinctively to restore it. I couldn't create a chain like this, but connecting the two pieces together was something I could manage. Finally, thank you, Master. The chain that was embedded in the wall slowly began to pull out, joined with the chain I had in my hand. The voice that echoed through my mind was full of joy, but I felt a bit of regret as I loosened the chains that restrained the monster. It all happened in a rush once the chain pulled free from the wall, shrinking down to match the size of the chain I held in hand. It let out a brilliant light, fading away to reveal a chain of persimmons in my hand. I put it away in my inventory, recognizing I wasn't ready to handle it quite yet. As I looked up, the bird had already vanished. I could feel a break in the connection between us, confirming his death. A huge void had formed in my heart. I tried to tell myself that new people could now fill that place, but I couldn't stop myself from thinking about how he may never return. Without a single goodbye, I pushed these thoughts out of my mind and looked around, noticing a black sword stuck in the ground for the first time. It looked kind of shabby compared to the twilight sword that I had, but the power contained inside of it was no joke. The magic circulating through it reminded me of the bird, much like my own. I collected the sword with a bitter smile, not even bothering to check its stats. I knew I wouldn't be able to anyway. This was the monster that had been watching over and protecting me until now, until his own death. And here, he left me a part of himself in the form of his sword to continue that vigil. I wanted to repay him, to get everything I had lost back. I would see the end of this road I was on. When I returned, Rain had his gaze still downward. Only, today has been hard on you. Rain, I want to have a drink. Are you all right? No, I shook my head and muttered weakly in response. Very well, it shall be in memory of those whose names are unsung. It'll be all right to get a little drunk. All right. He smiled gently at me and I tried to laugh. This was the first step I had taken past evolution. I lost what I was but had gained a lot in return. This was how I became the lord of this castle. Chapter 87. Songju 3. Songju 3. In the castle there was, of course, a room reserved for me. When I opened my eyes, I was lying there. I somehow slept. I couldn't believe it myself. I had gone for more than a year without sleeping. At first, I felt it pointless lying in this bed in an attempt to sleep. But I slept so well that I felt silly. I underwent numerous level-ups and evolution and could even regenerate, so I had no physical need to sleep. My high level of tolerance meant I had no mental need for it either. But now that I had woken up, the world around me looked and felt much different from before. Even though I knew nothing actually changed in the world around me, perhaps it was my heart that had changed, but I thought that could be a good thing. I decided to get up and change back into my regular equipment. Fumbling about as I stood up, I noticed a pretty black ribbon on my bedside table. I shared a drink in memoriam with Rain and then headed straight off to bed. In other words, despite knowing that Elle was waiting for me, I went to sleep. A chill ran through my body as I continued to look down at the ribbon. This was her way of protesting, a sign that if I continued to be late, there was no telling what she might do. The ribbon felt so sinister to me, I let out a sigh and grabbed the ribbon before I left. If I kept delaying, it wouldn't only get worse. Better to deal with it now before that happened. I already knew where she was, the top floor of that spire that she helped me place herself. My movements were quick as I glided through the structure. I knew the path to take by heart since I built it. My ability to leap with ubiquitous had increased considerably too, despite becoming LV1 again. It felt more natural now, and it was faster and stealthier than before. It really just confirmed to me that I had somehow become a being in this higher level system. I arrived quickly at the room Elle was staying in, entering through the open door. I thought she would be furious with me, but she was currently sitting in a chair and facing away from me. Did you see him off? Yes. She was the one who led me in the game to build this case. She had known who was in the basement of this place better than I did. I heard from Rain your memorial service. It went on longer than I had been planning. I thought my current body could withstand alcohol, but it was pretty strong. Don't underestimate Rain's brewing skills. She laughed lightly, and I let out a sigh of relief that she wasn't upset as I had thought. I think I have more space here. I'm glad it worked out that way. Yeah. Silence filled the room, sitting heavy over both of us. Fate. She was the first one to break through it. Go ahead and say it. How much did you recover? What? She still didn't show her face, but I could see her arms and legs shivering slightly. I don't know. How much you thought of me, what you came to think of me. If you didn't come to me first, I don't know. How long can I wait? How much can I endure? I don't know any of this. If you don't speak first, or do you need me anymore? Am I not part of what you're trying to recover? Damn it. It would appear that, after all this time, I was going about things in the wrong order. I thought it would be fine. Decades had already passed after all, and there hadn't been much change in the time since we met again. But that was wrong. Maybe she had finally reached her limit. I had messed up. I should have put off the memorial last night, even for a bit, to come to talk to her. Elle. She kept quiet. I wondered if she was blaming herself for making a mistake by saying those things now. I closed the distance between us, stopping right behind her. She flinched as she could feel my presence approaching her. Even though we were so close together now, I didn't feel the intense pressure that I had when I faced off against her in the Garden of Nak. I suppose it made sense. She now had her soul contained in a body. It was easier to face off against that than confront her very power of existence. I don't know either. What I did before, why I'm like this now, or what I should do from now on. Or about you, Elle. Okay. Her answer was bitter. Hearing that, I couldn't help myself but move around to face her head-on. She stood up, her expression one of amazement at my audacity. She was beautiful, just as she had been in the garden. I had reached a point where my body and soul were almost one and the same, but she was beyond that. A beauty that I thought couldn't exist in the world. Her body and soul one and the same. You have no manners. She tried to hurriedly cover her face, but I could still see the marks where the tears ran down her face. She hadn't changed at all since when I first met her. I couldn't understand her feelings then and had been trying to block out my own. So far, that was working fine, but not now. I didn't want to do that anymore. I took a step closer to her and drew her into my arms. It didn't matter how much control she had over his power. Direct contact with her would be undoubtedly dangerous. I raised my defenses and prepared for it, trying my best to maintain hold of my sense of reason. I'm sure now that I'm the person that you remember, though I'm still working through my old memories. But I'll get it all back. You're not the only one who wants that. I felt like I was successful in saying what I truly felt, and I felt glad that I could say it out loud before it was too late. I tried to pull back, but she shook her head and wrapped her arms around my chest. 12 more hours. That's too long. Then, 24 more hours. I was barely able to get her to release me, but finally, she let me go. Leaving the spire, I found Rain outside watering the garden. He laughed heartily as soon as he saw me. Have a hard time? I told you it'd be fine yesterday. I thought it would be good for you to see her. Her heart is open to you, although I wonder if you were able to see your own heart. Yeah. I laughed a bit bitterly at his words. Many people fall for her appearance or her strength, but you, fate, are the only one for her. It's a heavy burden to bear. Do you not need it? No, I'm going to take everything. My smile was bloody. I already decided to do this when I evolved into a Belkina. Maybe there was a way I could live without a care for the past, but that's not what I wanted. I wanted to take everything I didn't know about myself back. If I wanted to abandon the past, that was something I could consider after I regained it in the first place. There was no point in throwing away something I knew little about. What clear eyes! I have no need to worry about your future. He muttered this as he pulled something out of his pockets. A dark red muffler. Instead of pure blood's loyalty, I think a better name would be fighting spirit. It's a completely different item now. I accepted it, the notification window immediately popping up in front of me. Jinma's fighting spirit, 1-070/1, 070. Defense 380. Legendary rarity. It allows you to use your abilities beyond your limits, at the cost of the power of life. It was the first legendary item I had seen, aside from maybe that black sword currently slumbering in my inventory. It was at least the first one I could handle by myself. An artifact that would allow me to use my abilities beyond my limits. The more I grew, the more useful it would become. The fact that it also could never truly deplete my life force either meant that this artifact was a true treasure. The thought of fighting with it still sickened me, however. I have erased all traces of the elves in this item, so don't worry. Thank you. Oh, one more thing. I wrapped the muffler around my neck and pulled one more item from my inventory. The crystal artifact I acquired from the chest on the 7th floor, the goddess touch. From the moment I showed it to him, Rain had an expression of surprise plastered on his face. This may be difficult to analyze with my abilities. Something even you can't check out? Haha, I'm by no means a god. There are many things that are impossible for me. With those slightly bitter words, he accepted the crystal to examine. It doesn't appear to be harmful, and it will accept mana that you inject into it. Would you like to try it? I attempted it right away, the crystal greedily sucking up my mana. Pause, nothing happened. Then, as if it were waiting for it, the crystal gradually blackened as more mana poured into it. I could feel it hitting a limit, not much mana at all before it stopped. The crystal shimmered into the air, vanishing. I could still feel it in my hand, but as far as my eyes and my detection skill were concerned, it wasn't there. It recognized its owner through blood and then activated by devouring mana. What a peculiar artifact. It doesn't appear to have fully activated. Only, that just means I'll have to grow stronger. I let out a sigh and shrugged. Time for another drink? Yes, but perhaps not after you just met with Elle. That would be stupid, I suppose. You're a good man, Fate. We laughed briefly, bantering with each other. What are you planning from now on? This castle was built for a purpose, and I would like to tell you more about it and the world. But it isn't urgent. I would be grateful if you did, but maybe another time. I took in a deep breath, readying myself. Now, it's time for me to go back out into society. Chapter 88. The Lee Man Core 1. The Lee Man Core 1. The first thing I did was wake up Mirena, who was sleeping in her own room in the castle. It wasn't a normal sleep that she was under, but it was easy enough to devour the remainder of Rain's mana, which was keeping her asleep. She woke up almost instantly, blinking her eyes drowsily. I feel so refreshed. You did sleep for a while. That must be one of Rain's powers. Not only did it put you to sleep for a reasonable amount of time, but it also had some other effects depending on his intention. He may not like Mirena, calling her a hybrid instead of her name, but he considered her to be important to me at the very least. Myrena turned to face me, making me realize I wasn't using my illusion to appear as an elf anymore. Oh, Seja, you've changed. You look better than before, actually. Her reaction was not one that I expected. It doesn't really matter, but thank you. You can call me Fate instead of that. Her eyes opened wide, and mannerisms became shy. Is that a nickname between us? It's time to wake up. That's my real name. Your real name It wasn't a fake name like Seizha. It was my real name now. I was Fate and no one else. The name Kong Si had already disappeared from my status. I was confused between what was real and what wasn't, but now I had a new sense of clarity. I was the Jinma Fate. Alright, I'll call you Fate. So where are we? Is this place dangerous too? No, it's not. I checked the connection between us as I responded, confirming it was still intact. I don't have to return to that battlefield anymore, and neither do you. How? Because you're now my subordinate. Huh? Yeah. There wasn't any other explanation as to what happened. After I obtained that muffler, my capacity had increased enough that I could take on other people as my subordinate. Mirena had taken on that role. I didn't ask her to, but she must have expressed a desire to become one without me knowing. It wasn't easy to dominate someone with their own will, after all. But as a result, she had become subordinate to me and not to the rookie's battlefield. Now that I had evolved into a higher entity, anything that belonged to me wouldn't be beholden to a system like that battlefield. I didn't know if that logic only applied to me, however. It was entirely possible, and perhaps likely, that the Knights of Elicatra fell under a similar category as me. That would mean that the rookie's battlefield had some other purpose rather than just to protect the elves, as they remained there despite having the ability to leave. Not that it was something I could understand or should worry about. I couldn't even enter the battlefield anymore, now that I wasn't an elf. It was possible Mirena could if she chose not to be bound to me. That thought was enough to make me laugh. Mirena, go fight the knights all by yourself. Yeah, right. Why did I become Fate's subordinate? Did you just laugh at me? No. She paused in thought as she observed me. I think I know why now. Why? That's a secret. Mirena stubbornly refused to answer, so I decided to let it go. If she was convinced not to tell me, it was better for me not to push the subject. It occurred to me as I looked at her that Li Chanyu wasn't connected to me as my subordinate yet. I came here and figured out all of this before I had a chance to meet up with him. I had to go back into the dungeon for him. I want to go too. If you can hide yourself, I'll take you. Elves tend to attract too much attention. I don't think I can. Then watch the house. So, I'm in charge? Mirena was yelling happily. I suppose it didn't matter. The castle was quite large and only had a few inhabitants, after all. I went back to the dungeon, happy she was safe at the castle. Where are you? I just arrived on the 7th floor. I just saw the message you sent, Captain. Are you done? Yeah, I am. I'll give you the details in a bit. I no longer had the sensing skill, but I didn't lose the power. All of those skills had combined into my body, making it as natural as breathing to use them. Now, my area of detection was even wider, large enough for me to find Li Chanyu rather quickly. I went ahead and cleaned up the dungeon as I went, devouring the monsters. They couldn't affect me anymore, given my evolution, but they weren't really worth my time. I couldn't get experience or skills from them, and the recovery from predation wasn't much either. Now that I was a Jinma, my stamina and magic recovered quickly. Predation, however, would only function properly against other monsters of this higher system. No point in using it on these monsters. Oh aha! Li Chanyu was hunting high-level monsters with his hellhounds. One of them tearing through an owlbear's neck as soon as I had arrived. Captain! As soon as the battle was over, he turned to me. His eyes went wide with a moment of fear, and he took a step back. Did you change again? How's this new form? Better? I changed my skin to resemble more of a human through my illusionary item, his agitation diminishing as I did. That's better. A lot has happened, but before that, I reached a hand to him. His understanding became immediate as he let a sound of admiration. Is it possible now? I have no desire to force you into being my subordinate. Will you? I told you my answer was the same since we first met. He shrugged and grabbed my hand without hesitation. At the moment, I could feel an unbreakable bond between us now, like the one I had with Mirena. He was now my ally, and I would give him strength in return. That was the power of my domination skill, born as a result of evolving beyond the top-level leadership. Kaya! Go! At the same time, the hellhounds under his control began to evolve as well, through the power of my mana as it flowed through Lee Chanyu. They had now reached an advanced level. It looks like they're stronger than you are now. Shut up. It looked like the power I possessed would affect his followers, but not him. Perhaps he was now able to break through his own limitations now that he was bound to me. Not just through the limit of being a high-level monster, but maybe even past the system he was in. If you're with the captain, Lee Chanyu muttered to himself as if he were thinking of the same thing. He entered the boss room on the 7th floor, a dark shadow leading to the outside still within. He returned to his human form, his muscles tense as he looked at the dark portal. Captain, is it all right? Can we go out like this? I guess it's safe since the boss was defeated. Anyone who came to this dungeon now looking for a reward would be sorely disappointed. I'm anxious all of a sudden. Go. For Lee Chanyu it was a return. For me it was the first time I would face the outside world since becoming a monster. Anxiety, fear, and anticipation swirled inside me. Wait a second, Captain. I'm still not mentally prepared. I hid my anxiety and leaped toward the shadows, grabbing onto Lee Chanyu as I went. The pressure was overwhelming, the dungeon moving out from underneath us. Soon we were in a dense forest full of trees. The air was fresh, much different than that of the underground dungeon. The density of mana was lighter, too, making it easier to breathe. While the air of the battlefield had been refreshing, I hadn't been able to shake the feeling of the wind of Uranus while I was there. Now, though, I could breathe comfortably. The sun shone brightly over us, drenching us in light. It's the real sun. We're really outside. Lee Chanyu called a small bird to him with his skill, commanding it to fly up and scout the surroundings. It returned shortly with a report. I see. This is Seonbuk-gu, the mountain where the dungeon is located. Songbuk-gu. That had also been the place where I lived before. I closed my eyes, my mind full of thoughts of my family, those people who loved me so much, even though I wasn't actually related to them. Shall we go? Let's find a place to crash first. That'll be great. You have money? Only. You have money too. I'm going to spend it all on jajangmyeon. That costs like a bronze. Lee Chanyu and I, in an appearance no different than humans, talked the time away as we descended the mountain. Block! Damn it! They're coming from the mountain. What about the elves? They're supposed to help us. And I witnessed a scene of battle, a war between humans and monsters. Chapter 89, The Lee Man Court 2. The Lee Man Court 2. It'll explode after 3 seconds. The western outskirts are defenseless. Stand up straight. Humans and monsters were colliding in the buildings and roads I had known well. A fast food restaurant I had often visited when I lived here was being destroyed. A boar half the size of it rampaging through it. Huge explosions went off around its body as it was being repelled by the humans. Fuck! More incoming. They'll be here soon. How? I muttered, unsure of what exactly I could saw. When did this world become a dungeon? It didn't. Lee Chanyu responded immediately, denying my claim. It's not a dungeon. It's just that a large number of monsters appeared here. Is this common? If it were, there wouldn't be much left. We were running forward, a giant eagle swooping in from above us as we advanced. There are still civilians left? It's too late for them. When it goes in for the kill, throw the net. I drew my twilight sword, holding it at the ready. When the eagle descended to claim my head, I swung forward. The eagle screamed briefly, cut off by my sword, cleaving its head off. You received 1 gold and 80 silver. It's weak, but there were too many people around to be binge eating. Not like there would be much of a benefit from eating it anyway. It just felt like a waste to not eat it, no matter how weak its energy was. He killed an intermediate monster in 1 shot? Are they from a guild? As the attention began to gradually shift to us, Lee Chanyu tapped on my shoulder. We should organize and consider this first, Captain. Yeah. I burned the eagle's body, turning to gaze out at the army of monsters rampaging through the roads and buildings that were so familiar to me. Nostalgia filled me as my memories of my days as a human came to mind. You may be strong, but if you blank out, you'll get hurt. Enemy ahead. Humans, hiding by buildings or signboards, were attacking the monsters as they advanced on the road. They used bombs and magic to whittle away at them as humans with swords and axes went out to block their advance. I couldn't help but admire them for their struggle to live. I suppose that if I wanted to blend into the society again, it would be necessary to help them. It should be alright even if I were a little flashy about it too. Don't worry about killing too many of them, just enough to make them think we're strong. Got it. Don't be too violent. Alright. I kicked off the floor as I responded, bursting forward. Black roses stretched out from my fingertips, enveloping a group of monsters near a small clothing store and entangling them like fish in a net. Ha! I swung the black rose net around, applying lightning to it as the monsters within tried to break free. They could do nothing as I let it fly through the air, aiming it right at a group of monsters that had just crossed the building's rubble. The monsters that weren't crushed by the weight died from the shocking net. Which guild are you from? An overseas one? In the end, I used a black rose to clean up all the monsters that were near me. Using ubiquitous, I moved swiftly through the air above the battlefield. Many of the humans who used ranged weapons or magic tried to thin out the flying monsters, but there were still too many of them. Kaya! Kayak! The monsters screamed and rushed me as soon as I appeared in front of them, blasting poison and fire from their mouths. Some of them even tried to drain my mana. But they were all attacks based on mana, and mana handled by the subsystem was too weak to properly hurt me. I spewed out my own mana, dispersing their attacks and melting them before they could reach me. Key. Weak. Lunatic trickster. Black lightning. Flames. And ice all filled the air around me. The mana that had come from Jinma swept through the air like a storm, knocking away all of the monsters that had taken flight and easily rebuffing their magical attacks. My magical ability had changed the most during my evolution, the Belkina being exceptionally good at both martial arts and magic. The process of moving his mana to create magic shortened as well, making it exceptionally quick to use. I was still more confident in my sword skills than my magic, but I didn't want to show all of my abilities to people I didn't know. Damn! It's coming from the air. Run away. It's impossible for us to defeat. Quoa! Ah! The roar coming from the monsters on the ground increased, and the ones in the air were acting oddly now. They weren't trying to kill the humans. Now they were gathering in one place. It was something I was familiar with. Now I know. They were acting similar to the monsters in the rookie's battlefield. Thinking back now, I could tell that I felt it when I had been killing these monsters, that tiny fragment of a fallen and deformed soul. Hey, come down here. I ignored the calls of the humans below and drew the twilight sword. The monsters gathering together kept increasing, dark gray energy emanating from the center of them. How did they escape the rookie's battlefield? They are similar to a soul monster but aren't quite the same. It was clear once I had thought about it. The Knights of Elicatra must have brought them here, after somehow figuring out how to replicate that same phenomenon that would occur on the battlefield. If the monsters here began to acquire the strange abilities of those soul monsters, and the wind of Utinus began to blow here on Earth, it would be a real disaster. Despair on a scale unlike that on the rookie's battlefield. Maybe if I waited for them to finish fusing, I could learn more about the Elicatra's goal, but I began to notice a weird movement in the space where they were converging. I couldn't afford to wait any longer. Wonderful! The monster birds were unrecognizable now as they gathered in at one point to form a huge mass. I had to suppress my disgust as I watched the negative energy spew out and distort the space around them. The process of change was much more grotesque to watch here than it had been on the battlefield. I hefted my greatsword, filling it with the power of my skill reaper. Immediately, as if recognizing my intent, the mass began to shoot out hundreds of lung tendrils from its lump-shaped body to stop me. It would have been a lot more dangerous than the monster I faced before on the battlefield if I hadn't evolved. As I swung my sword, dozens of the tendrils were severed and burned away. More came for me immediately, but I was fully prepared with ubiquitous to jump away. My alter ego remained in my place, full of my mana. As the tendrils constricted around it, the alter ego exploded, burning away the tendrils. Jaya! I stood right in front of the monster's body, new tendrils rising out of it to try and grasp at me. I severed them easily, devouring them whole with the power of predation. The humans that had been fighting before were now fleeing, allowing me to go all out without fear of observers. It's just a little different from those soul monsters. I wondered what the knight's goal was. What sort of will was driving them forward, if any at all were. Perhaps the great fusion itself had been aimed at the knight. As always, questions that I couldn't resolve floated through my mind. I pushed them aside, cutting through the monster's body with my greatsword. The energy of the Reaper's skill stretched out like a scythe, severing through the monster as it followed the trajectory of my sword. Maybe if I waited a bit longer it would reach the higher level system, but it was little more than a mass of malice and magic right now. My predation made quick work of the part one had cut off. Ooh! Suddenly, the area of space where the huge mass was cracked open as if it had been cut by a sword, a brilliant light pouring out of it. From inside it, a creature wearing shining armor sprung out. Oh! I didn't have time to register what had happened. The creature jumping straight at me with a war hammer in hand. The radiant light pouring forth seemed to suppress the mana of Jinma that was welling inside me. It was mana that was the polar opposite of my own. I used Ubiquitous to temporarily evade him as I considered this. It's not over.
Keep running.
I could still hear the shouts and screams of the humans that were still on the battlefield, but I pushed them out of my mind. This monster appeared in a place where the monsters were fusing. Was this the goal of them fusing, or were they drawn there to devour this creature? Only, the monsters on the ground were focused on the armored figure, howling in the air. But Li Chanyu wasn't going to let this opportunity go to waste. His hellhounds were gnawing at the monsters on the ground, working at reducing their numbers. I turned my undivided attention to the armored figure, glad that I could rely on Li Chanyu to take care of the rest. I prepared myself to strike out with my sword, eyeing my target. The monster rocketed forward, colliding into me as I used detection to analyze its strengths and weaknesses. This armored soul monster was as fast and strong as it was massive. But it didn't belong to a higher system, and that was what mattered. I trapped him in the air by stretching out a black mine, activating Lunatic Trickster to add to its power. I even sacrificed some of the equipment I had laying about my inventory to add to it. The creature flew forward in a straight line, taking the brunt of the trap head-on. As it staggered, I rushed forward and stabbed my greatsword into its chest. Its armor couldn't protect it from Reaper, eroding and melting away under my attack. You received 382 gold. You obtained a fragment of light. The monster lost its life, and its power floated in the air before falling to the ground. Before it could land, I quickly stored it away in my inventory. The humans who had been hiding were returning, their eyes focused on me. Amazement, excitement, joy, gratitude, doubt, and jealousy. All these emotions were intermingling within the gazes of those around me. Unmoved by it all, I remained in the air and thought. About new enemies, about the Jinma, about the knights. Chapter 90, The Li Man Core 3. The Li Man Core 3. Ubiquitous wasn't merely an ability that transferred me around. At its core, it was an ability that allowed me to be wherever I wanted. It was only showing its real ability now after it had evolved past the advanced level, but it was still impossible to float infinitely in the air with it. At least for now that it was still at the first level. I lost my strength and fell to the ground, recovering my lost mana by the time I landed. The survivors were coming out from the carnage, going after the remaining monsters. The monsters were still giving a decent fight, but were slowly being overwhelmed now. I still didn't know what the goal of these monsters was. If they had intended to fuse and form that monster wearing the armor. Perhaps they didn't have any goal, no shadowy figure giving out orders. I'll figure it out later. I swung my hand, mana gathering at my fingertips in the form of a lightning whip to lash out at the monsters within range of me. As the whip snapped, Spheres of dozens of lightning bolts flared out, destroying the monsters. It didn't take long to clean up the rest of the monsters, and Li Chanyu approached me as the fight was drawing to a close. "Captain, weren't you the one who said not to go too wild?" "Ah, don't worry about it." That was something I definitely did not want to hear from Li Chanyu, who was being followed by 3 high-level hellhounds. Besides, I hadn't shown off all of my skills. "What the hell are you?" As we were conversing, one of the humans walked up to us. It was one of the men leading the charge earlier, one of their strongest, although he was barely past level 100. Li Chanyu quickly dismissed his hellhounds with his skill as he noticed him approaching. "I've been down in a dungeon for quite some time. Is Songbuk-gu normally so popular with monsters?" I asked as I looked around, acting as if it were natural. "It has been since 2 months ago when that Chaos Soul appeared." Chaos Soul? That's the name the elves call those monsters. The man grimaced. "The elves? They didn't come even though they promised to help. If it weren't for you, we would have died here." It seemed the relationship between humans and elves, or specifically the Elakatra, was worsening. I wondered if it was because of what I had been doing that made it so much worse. If so, I couldn't help but mentally pat myself on the back for a job well done. As I considered it, though, I wondered if I needed to be worried. My ears were pointed not unlike an elf's, after all. Although, now that I belong to this higher system, I doubt they can properly recognize what I am through my illusion anyway. Looking around, I noticed that the eyes of all the survivors here were focused on us. "Would it be possible for you to tell me more about these monsters? Especially that armored one?" "Of course. As humans with the same enemy, we should cooperate this much." He smiled briskly at me, and I laughed in response. Humans with the same enemy? Yeah, right. For large goals, it was easy to demand cooperation and camaraderie. But the moment a chance for profit appeared, so would they quickly turn to betrayal. After more than a year of living as a monster and seeing the ugly side of humanity, my trust in them had hit rock bottom. Ultimately, however, it didn't matter. It was good to be vigilant, but I wasn't really trying to build a relationship with these people. I was just playing along for now, so there was no need to worry about them betraying me. "Follow me. Leave it to the others to clean up." "Hey, don't make us do it all," one of the man's companions complained, but the man ignored them and guided us over to a still intact building. Monster corpses and gore painted the outside of it, but the structure was still in good shape. "Long time no see." It's nothing." I shook my head, smiling bitterly. A young woman, this man's assistant most likely, greeted us inside and began to make coffee. "So, they started to appear 2 months ago?" "Yeah, not only here but in Seoul and the world as a whole. The monsters in the dungeon. They're different, as you saw. If those elves had come to help, it wouldn't have been so bad." My ears pricked up at the mention of elves. Maybe I could get some information about the Knights of Elakatra from this man. They have powerful skills and artifacts, so why didn't they arrive today? Their timing is too good sometimes. I drank coffee as he spoke, enjoying the bittersweet taste of it. It had been too long. "We still don't know where the Chaos Soul came from." "It wasn't from Hater." The man nodded. "They're tricky to deal with too. When they gather in large quantities like before, they fuse." "Yeah, it looks like there are certain conditions to it, though. They have to eat enough humans or their own kind. But they'll make it happen." I thought back to the fusion of the Chaos Souls, how it was a little different from that on the rookie's battlefield. Are the Elakatra behind it? What for? And what was that armored monster? I held my thoughts, waiting for the man to continue. "And there's the demons too." My heart immediately began to pound. "Demons? You asked about it, that monster that appeared in the fusion. The elves call them demons. Like the Chaos Soul, they appeared 2 months ago as well. Wherever the Chaos Souls flock to, they appear as well." It was almost funny, thinking about it. That figure drenched in light looked more like an angel than a demon, but I figured it would be best not to bring up my familiarity with demons. The only thing for sure is that they're not from Hater. That means they're connected to Earth somehow. I wanted to shake my head. The Elakatra seemed to be using some sleazy means to tie themselves to the humans. The underworld the demons and Jinma belonged to was a part of Hater. That monster wearing armor also probably belonged there. Maybe not the underworld, but where? The sky? I figured I would ask Rain about it later. The demons aren't much different than the Chaos Soul. They're just stronger but still hostile to humans. Why do they only appear where the fusion happens? Perhaps, did the fusion happen so they could swallow up the demon, or did the fusion summon them? The two are hostile to each other. Some people think that the demons are chasing the Chaos Souls when they fuse. I felt as if something was tickling at my mind as he said that. The Elicatra wanted to use the Chaos Soul, but the purpose of that monster was still unclear. I was hoping to learn more about what was happening, but everything felt as if it were becoming more jumbled. I felt like a kid who knew nothing, and it frustrated me to no end. I'll just have to kill them all then. That was the conclusion I came to. All I had to do was identify the enemy. Then I could kill all of those who were my enemy. If I did that, I would be fine. I didn't notice Li Chanyu and the human, who were listening to me, trembling slightly. I'm afraid that's not really feasible, Captain. I'm going to do it. So, where are you from? You're so strong. Do you not belong to a guild? The man hesitantly asked me, his expression carefully guarded. I'm going to make one now, actually. Then you could join our guild. I'm all right. No, thank you. The man lowered his head, but he had already expected that would be the case. He knew our abilities were too high above his own. I stood up, a bloody smile plastered on my face. Only, thank you for all the information. Let's go grab some lunch, Li Chanyu. You're still hungry? I lightly tapped him on the head and left the building. I couldn't let anyone know that I devoured the monsters I had killed in battle. He let out a short laugh, realizing his mistake, and followed after me. It was lucky he had whispered it quietly in the first place. So, what do you want to eat? Jajangmyeon. His response cut through the air, freezing my heart. The only Chinese restaurant in Songbuk-gu was destroyed in the battle today. What? Upon hearing those words, it felt as if something broke inside of me. Intense, uncontrollable anger unlike any I had ever felt before filled me. In the end, we had to head all the way to Zhangyu-gu to get some jajangmyeon for dinner. We've reached the end of today's episode. Thank you for traversing the boundless landscapes of fantasy with us. If today's story has sparked joy within you, please remember to hit the like button, share our journey with others, and subscribe to Lord of the Stories for an ever-expanding collection of mystical escapades. Until we meet again to turn the page to a new adventure, hold the tales dear in your heart and let the embers of magic warmly glow in your spirit. Farewell, intrepid explorers of the narrative unknown.